Okay, folks, now we'll start our last session. Our last session, it is a panel discussion. And the discussant will be Dr. Vern Long, Program Area Lead for the Legume Productivity, Bureau of Food Security, USAID. Dr. Hailo Tefera, Ag Technology Specialist at Bureau of Food Security, USAID. Dr. Eberson Calvo, Director Tropical Milhomento and Genetica, TMZ Brazil. And every discussant will give us a 5-minute top line overview of today's workshop and some questions, and then we'll open it for discussion and the questions from the audience. Dr. Long.
Thank you, and it's really great that those of you who are still here are really caffeinated and ready to really engage on some of the thinking that's gone on today and to synthesize it and bring it back to actionable next steps. So one of the things I wanted to do is to bring us up to 30,000 feet, looking at all of the different topics that have been discussed today. You know, the fundamental goal of Feed the Future is to reduce poverty and to eliminate hunger. And these are the top-line goals of Feed the Future, the initiative that ultimately funds the Innovation Lab and many of the mission-level investments we have at country level. And I think that each of our speakers today have taken us to the tip of the iceberg from where they sit. So you have the research in the Innovation Lab, and that's one, set of activities that are going on. But if you were to dig down, there's an enormous iceberg underneath all of that, everything that Pete was describing. And each of the subsequent speakers talked about each of the different components of what it takes to really bring technologies to our target beneficiaries, the farmers and the processors who are in the communities that we care about, to really reduce hunger and poverty. And so in thinking through what all the different pieces of the puzzle that we've discussed, and there are many more, as we well know, as development practitioners, I would really challenge you all to think, coming back to Pete, he's got a program that's going to be running for the next 4 years, maybe for the next 9 years. We have 10-year approval system, so he could conceivably have a 10-year program. So insofar as he is shaping the research activities of his program, many of the PIs and leaders of his program are here in this room. It's an opportunity for those of you who sit on the other side, the non-research side, to give some feedback to his team. What are the areas where you feel like you, working as a practitioner in the field, see challenges, and where the research agenda could be shaped, pushed, pulled, modified to capture some of those issues? And sometimes it's just awareness. Sometimes people just aren't even aware of the thing that is so obvious to you as a practitioner, but a researcher may not have thought about it in designing their program. So I challenge the practitioners to really engage and think about, based on what they've heard, what's the kind of insight they'd like to give back to the researchers. And then I'd like to turn that around as well. As researchers, what are the kinds of insights or dimensions of the work that people are doing at community level that then might shape the choices that a breeder makes? There was a comment made about the challenges of productivity, dealing with just production constraints are so significant that we're not really thinking about quality considerations right now. So is that true? And if that's true, is there information you'd need as a breeder that maybe the food scientists in the room know about, or the development practitioners who've dealt with processing know the specs that are required? There's already a quick assay. You just include it in your screening nurseries, and you're going to have that variety moving forward through the pipeline with whatever characteristic it needs to have. So I just would really like to engage the community in this room, because you're all sitting from very different tips of your icebergs, and you know an enormous amount about your iceberg, and I really want to use this opportunity to cross-pollinate further in our discussion period. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Vera. Dr. Hailo?
Thank you. I really would like to thank USAID and the Soybean Innovation Lab, really to pick up the tropical soybean issue to this stage and having this workshop. I've been a soybean breeder for IITA based in Malawi for some time. And it was really a challenge to get soybean resources to do research for development work on soybean. There was a big challenge. And As we listen today, soybean is important commodity in the world. Its production is growing at 3% annually, and there is a market for all soybean produced. And of the $126 billion annual soybean volume or income, the share for Africa is very small, less than 1%. And where we see FAO stat for a tropical soybean, actually African countries import a lot of soybean grain and soybean products worth $4.4 billion per annum. So they import soybean grain, 1.7 million tons. They import soybean cake, 3.3 million tons. And they import soybean oil, 1.8 million tons. So all in all, 6.8 million tons of soybean grain and its products. So this shows that there is a high demand for soybean. And if we really push soybean production in Africa, and if we push improved varieties of soybean in Africa, it's going to be like demand-driven rather than supply-driven because it's needed very much. On the other hand, the average area of soybean in Africa now is 3 years average, 1.7 million hectares, and the yield is, total production is 2.1 million tons per year per annum. It's an average of 3 years, and yield is 1 ton per hectare. And this is very small as compared to the world average. The world average is about 2.3, 2.4, and really with some kind of pushing with improved varieties and some of the management practices, this yield can be pushed further in Africa. So the crop is very important. It meets really the overarching agenda of Feed the Future in terms of income generation and nutrition, poverty reduction, and it's also important for feed, for poultry industry, and even aquaculture. And even the straw is an important feed for livestock in Africa, where there is a mixed farming system. And it's also important in the mixed farming system, in the system improvement. It adds some nitrogen into the soil, and then the succeeding cereal crop really benefits from that. And there are research evidences that yield can be increased if maize is grown after soybean. It also reduces some of the parasitic weeds like striga under African condition when it is rotated with maize production. So how do we increase its production? The short-term strategy is just to scale the existing varieties available in the continent with the help of IITA since the 70s. There are more than 24 varieties released in different national programs. So because there is a need, the seeds of those improved varieties can be scaled now. And the R4D should also be strengthened. So I can say that this innovation lab is the first of its kind in promoting R4D in soybean along the value chain. So it is really valuable. And then how can we really leverage that one? How can we get more resources to do more work? So the existing soybean innovation lab is functioning in limited countries of Africa, and then the scope of the project is also limited. But really we appreciate USAID for that, but more resources are needed to really leverage that work. Another challenge at the moment, some missions are engaged in scaling soybean now, because the national programs, the national government, they want soybean to be promoted in their agriculture system. And for that, there is a challenge. The challenge is the seed system. The seed system is very weak. Somebody mentioned this morning that the private sector is more interested in hybrid maize or maize production, and the legume seed, including soybean, is really not picked up. So still we are facing that problem. So the only private company that is dealing on soybean and seed system is Seedco. It has 3 to 4 decades of experience. And then the other champion is only IITA and the national programs there. So these two are very important issue for me. How can we leverage this research for development initiative for Africa? Africa is a huge continent, and there is a huge potential for increasing soybean production. There is a suitable climate, land situation. Soybean fits in rotation with maize, and the culture system is maize after maize after maize, and soils are degraded. So it helps the environment, it helps the farmers, it helps everybody. So how do we leverage that one, and how do we deal with the challenging seed system issue at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Calvo?
Well, thank you. Peter, thank you for inviting me to be here. I wrote a couple of comments, and I don't think I'll have time to go through all of them, because when I start speaking, I speak too much. I need to say that I'm completely ignorant about Africa. I've never been in Africa, but I understand the diversity of Africa. I was just talking with a friend in my table from DR Congo, and I can see the diversity there. And one thing that concerns me, Peter, is, as you asked me to talk about, my impressions on the project, is, to me, from what I heard here today, humbled with all the information, and I was just wondering whether the project has focus enough. I think that there's a lot of things to be done, and especially when we are talking about funding 5 years down the road, results need to be shown. So I think one thing that we need to have is focus. The benefits, I'm coming through the talks, Dr. Bertrand, one thing that he mentioned at certain point of his talk was regarding the competition between Brazil and US in the beginning, when Brazil, as you probably know, the breeding in Brazil was supported by the US, and I can see there was a lot of opposition to that. And I keep thinking about if Brazil had not entered the soybean production, probably China wouldn't have enough soybean to buy. So the same thought I have regarding Africa, and that's why we as a private company accept your invitation, Peter, and to collaborate. Obviously, we are a breeding company. There's not too much that we can do, but we are open to share germplasm, because we really believe that the difference is not in the germplasm, but in the capacity of breeders to read the needs of the farmers and develop new cultivars. So I just talked with Dr. Villot, and we are willing to collaborate on that, and I hope other companies join that effort too. One thing that struck me a lot was we talked a lot about seed quality, and definitely it's a big issue. I think breeding can help with that. I have colleagues at my company that, in the past, is senior breeders that received germplasm from Taiwan, and it has an extremely physiological quality. And so there is variability there that the breeders can exploit to improve. But one thing that to me was interesting is maybe somehow the project should support, and again, I'm ignorant on Africa, but the experience in Brazil, as you know, Brazil, we have like 2 different farm systems in Brazil. Central Brazil, it's dominated by huge farms, although I don't believe that several of them will go to Mozambique. It's a complete different farm situation from southern Brazil, where I actually live. The average soybean farm production there is like close to 100 hectares in southern Brazil. So the successful model, in my understanding, for soybeans in southern Brazil was the cooperative system. So I think we should look more closely to that. And some guys from, forgive me, I can't remember the name, but from either Nigeria or mentioned that community systems. I think that's, you know, a small cooperative. There was a criticism regarding these co-ops, regarding funding. In Brazil, the co-ops in the beginning also had that problem. Several of them went bankrupt, but they were took over by, you know, other co-ops. So I think there is hope in the cooperative system. And I would like to mention here that the largest co-op in Brazil, in my state, Paraná state, is Coamo. It's a huge cooperative. Was funded by a practitioner, okay, in the early 70s. So again, Peter, the project to me, I think we need to support leaderships, not only, you know, technical people, but leaderships to develop these initiatives, as well as entrepreneurs to create the demand, because I don't believe that the soybean will, you know, grow if the demand doesn't grow. And I think the example that Jake gave was, you know, very, very interesting in the successful in Mozambique. How far am I? 1 minute less? Well, what else can I say here? The GMO issue that was brought up, I agree with my colleague. I'm also a soybean grower, and I agree that we need to support the science, but also I see, you know, honestly, as Africa with these small farmers, a good opportunity to exploit the market of the non-GMO soybean, which is open. For instance, our company was approached 2 months ago in Brazil by a company in Europe that wants 600 tons of soybean per year, non-GMO soybean for their fish production there. So I think would be a great opportunity of, you know, value-added trade for good project for, you know, countries in Africa. Okay. And another thing that I would like to stress is, in Brazil, our experience, and there is several reasons for the successful, which I consider a successful project in Brazil, the soybean. But one thing that was very important was that breeders, through Embrapa in the beginning and also to private companies, we sort of anticipated the problems that will appear when you scale up soybean production. So I urge also that the project start to think about on problems that probably will come up, and I can just illustrate with the stem canker problem that came in Brazil in 1989. If Embrapa hadn't anticipated that, we would be, you know, essentially gone with soybean. So keep in mind that the problems will appear when we scale things up. And so that's some of the main comments that I have, and I really congratulate the USAID for the initiative, and remembering that I'm a live witness. Essentially my entire career is in soybean, and I witnessed all the beginning of soybean. I mean, the most promising part of the soybean in Brazil. And we started, basically with soybean germplasm coming from the US. And our main, what we consider the soybean father, the Brazilian soybean father, Dr. Romeu Kiel, received a scholarship from USA to come here to study here. So I think we owe that to Mississippi State, yeah. And Dr. Hartwig, who actually trained him, once was questioned about giving the germplasm to the Brazilians, and he apparently raised up and said, "Well, I agree with you guys. We shouldn't give germplasm to Brazil. So let's give all back to China also." And so that's the thought of our company, and again, that's why we are here to help whatever we can do. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We can take a question or comments from the floor.
Yeah, Vern, I just wanted to maybe have you go a little bit further when you're thinking about USAID and kind of the whole innovation lab, direction, design, impact. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between the research community and practitioners? Was it in the design? And how are you expecting or thinking about the feedback, and what sorts of mechanisms? I mean, we can do stuff like this, we can do a lot of things, but what would be some of the mechanisms you think are most effective for a positive feedback loop between the research community and the practitioner community?
Take another question from the floor, and then we can answer them.
See, mine is a comment. You see, when we talk today about soybean, we are talking about breeding and seeds. But in West Africa, farmers always ask one question. After demonstrating good varieties, they say, how will I sell it? Because the soybean home consumption maybe is 10% or maybe 5%. 95% is dependent on industry. So we have to really think about the value chain. I saw one presentation from the economist, but I think we need more market specialists in the platform so that we create the market for soybean, because the farmers disadopt. Once they say pack soybean, I was told by one community leader, don't give me soybean. That was 5 years ago, 2004, in the Cedar project. Say, what will I do with soybean? I want to grow cowpeas and maize. I said, just take it, chief. I'll go and look for market. Until we went to a processing company to come to the communities and sign MOU with the farmers, give them license purchase orders. Now they say, now we can grow. Even when they were growing, they call me to the camera. My colleagues are laughing at me that I'm allocating my land to a crop that has no market instead of growing cowpea or maize. So I had to still call the man in the industry, please take the cell phone and talk to this farmer that if he grows this soybean, next year you come and buy. And now, when we go there, they want to tell you, well, thank you for forcing soybean down our throat. Now we are getting more money for soybean than the other crops. So the value chain is very important. Also nutrition, I thought people talking about nutrition is not only targeting smallholder farmers to process soybean. Nestle, for example, is very more interested in processing food products for West Africa. These huge food industries, the Chivita company, they are making milk, soy milk now in West Africa, Nestle. So if we target them and link them to the nutrition people in this project, they will go and tell them the innovations, the new food products, and say this is the new food product we have developed. in the lab, and then the industries can take over to produce and sell in the supermarket. Instead of only thinking that the small farmers are going to do the processing. So that's just a comment from my example of soybean, because this is what I do every day. I like soybean. So I always have several stories about soybean.
My name is Amsalu from working with Catholic Relief Services in Tanzania. We have a USDA-funded soybean value chain project, which started in fiscal year 2013, and it's going for 4 years. We are working on production, financing, and marketing of soybean, and we work along the value chain. I agree with the gentleman here. When we first started the program, what farmers were asking or saying was that we have been producing soybean in the past, but we have stopped producing soybeans because there is no market, and if we produce and if we cannot sell it, we cannot eat it, so that's why we stopped production. And also when we started the program, we had the same, hearing from the farmers and looking at the market situation, we had the same fear about the market. But in a year or 2 time, 2 years' time, we realized that the market was not really the issue. The main issue was the production. Market is very dynamic. You may think that today there is no market, but tomorrow there could be market. But production cannot, you cannot change that quickly in production. For example, the main problem that we have, as we heard here, is just to confirm that our main issue is seed. There are no seed varieties. Like in Tanzania, we have 4 varieties released by the national research institutions. One is a very old variety, one is not that good. There are only 1 or 2 which are really feasible. And Seedco is working there, as you said, but they have not registered any variety yet in Tanzania. They have, they want to bring, for example, varieties from Zambia, but the regulation doesn't allow bringing in varieties which are not registered in the country. So we are really facing a big challenge. So as you were asking, what we ask this lab to help is in the variety development and release of varieties, especially the varieties that are released in the region, can be with the new policy, I think, within 1 year period of time, a variety can be tried for 1 season and can be released, but that's a new policy through this harmonization policy. We have not seen it implemented, but if we get support from like USAID and other who are involved in this program, that will be helping a lot. The other issue is like in terms of capacity building and institution building. I heard this morning talking about it. So as we know, mostly capacity building of individuals may not resolve issues that countries have or any programs have. So institutional building is really, really important. That's what we see, for example, in the national research institutions. We don't see that capacity. There are a few individuals, for example, on soybean production or breeding. I know one person who is now retiring in one of the national institutions in Tanzania. He's almost retiring. So they don't have any capacity to breed the different varieties. So those are the areas that I think this lab could be helpful, I would say.
Thank you. I think we can answer these questions or reply to this comment and then take another round later.
So I'll start with a little bit of a description going to Pete's question about the relationship between our innovation labs and our central research investments and many of our programs in the field. And then I'm going to open it to my colleagues on the panel to comment, particularly on the scaling and the technology. I think from a private sector's perspective, you might have some interesting insights, as well as Hailu's on the front lines of our scaling efforts, so he'll have really good insights there as well. So to go again to sort of the 30,000 foot position, which is where I spend a lot of my time right now. I don't get a chance to really dig into many of the substantive issues that you all are dealing with, so it's very exciting to be here. So AID's research portfolio is funded primarily out of funds that come from Washington. So the money from our office in the Bureau for Food Security funds the research investments both to the CGIAR as well as to private and public sector collaborations, as well as our innovation labs based at US universities. So those research investments, the primary goal of those investments is to develop research outputs that are relevant to the target beneficiaries we care about. So that's the bottom line. But programs like Pete's have to go one step further, actually 10 steps further. We look to Pete for his leadership as the director of the program to know what research his teams are doing at the granular level, from the breeding, all of the different pillars in your program, as well reaching out and forging the partnerships and connections as you're doing at this meeting. So this is exactly the kind of linking the dots or jumping from iceberg to iceberg that we really look to you to do. So I think that the feedback you get from the room will be most helpful for you and for your team going forward. And what are the different ways? There are many different ways to engage. There's the global level here, country specific. We know that there are many specific, there's the seed policies, which can be quite specific to a national context. And so scaling varieties in one country in Ghana is going to be a really different set of questions and issues than you might have in Mozambique. So recognizing there's country-specific issues, and so in-country partner meetings are probably a really valuable thing, both for your researchers and for the development partners on the ground. The other thing is that we recognize that there are other layers that you're interfacing with, both as researchers, as development practitioners, and it's this policy interface. And just as our office manages all of the research programs that we fund, we also have other people on a policy team that engage very directly with national governments who are working out policy priorities, defining whether they're going to tackle seed policy or trade policy, any number of policies that might be constraints to providing an enabling environment for a robust agricultural-led economic growth strategy. So governments are thinking this through. They're trying to figure out what the priorities are. Our office, our policy team engages directly with governments. And so insofar as you all come up against these issues like seed policy and seeing where things have worked and where things haven't worked and what strategies have worked that are more at an implementation level versus the policy itself, all of this information can come to Pete, and he serves as the conduit so that we can get information to our policy team. So we really love to have these feedback loops, and the more communication there is across all the different actors, the more we can get a global view of these things. Because sometimes you have an idea that's worked in one area that actually will work in other areas. That's a policy intervention, and that's where our team as research division is really working closely with our policy team. But in the end, it comes back to what do you all tell us is going on so that we can help on our end with all the different levers that we can operate. So hopefully that sort of sets the stage and sort of expectations from us as well as opportunities for you all to sort of move the agenda forward. Going to the scaling questions, I think just 2 points I wanted to make that are really important. I think the Tanzania program, the Soy and Pesa program is a really great opportunity because it is very national specific and it's outside the scope of this program. You're not working in Tanzania, right? But it's a great opportunity for learning, again, cross-learning, where your program is operating. I think you have social science activities in Mozambique, right? So there'll be opportunity for you to cross-link. So I encourage you all to make sure you to connect before you leave the room. Okay, I'll stop there.
Yeah, maybe I can add some point on the specific issue raised on Tanzania. While you are scaling the old varieties, I think the good idea is to introduce the varieties released in the region, like under Tropical Legume Store project, same variety, a good variety with wide adaptation, has been released in Kenya, in Malawi, and in Mozambique. So the soybean growing environment in Tanzania may not be quite different from these countries, like a mid-altitude area. So it's worth trying those released varieties. Maybe a variety with wide adaptation and release in many countries may be appealing to Tanzania also to get introduced and tested. But I understand that the Soybean Innovation Lab is not working in Tanzania. It is in some countries, some other countries. So that's why I raised earlier that leveraging this program is very important to really address the soybean research for development issues in some of the countries where the crop is very important.
Okay, any question from?
One of the questions that, Dave Meese, plant breeding consultant. One of the questions that has come up several times has been the whole matter of seed longevity in the tropical arena. And so we've had a while, we've had Brazil, which has had a fairly significant amount of time to learn things. Africa may have learned things. What is the current status of knowledge that would be either compositional or genetic basis of things that could be very valuable, that could be moved quickly to enhance seed longevity?
David, IIT. Mine is not a question, but just a few reflections from what I've heard so far. You see, as we think of promoting and developing soybean in Africa, there are a lot of exciting opportunities which actually we need to exploit. For example, in Southern Africa, most of the governments are actually looking at diversification of options for maize-based systems. And I think soybean would actually fit in that diversification option. I'm mentioning this because I think this morning I heard on several occasions a question around, is it going to be substituting crops or what? You know, but I think that if governments are already thinking about diversifying, then let's go and market soybean so that actually it fits within the diversification programs of most governments. Another opportunity which has already been alluded to by the colleague from Tanzania is the harmonization of the seed laws. You know, it's been actually found that most of the seed laws in Africa are outdated and counterproductive. So the SADC region, for example, have actually come to an agreement that, okay, look, if a variety is tested and released in 2 countries, then it should be marketed across the 13 countries. The benefit of that is that this is actually going to promote private sector participation in the seed sector, you know, because then what that does is that it actually expands the market opportunities. So again, as we think about moving forward, let's actually try to think about how we can exploit that opportunity. The other reflection, there was a question from Pete who said, well, how do we promote soybean? What is the prescription going to be? Is it going to be labor? Is it going to be low tech? Is it going to be high tech? Well, really, I don't know the answer, but it depends, as far as I'm concerned, on the level of production. You know, if you're looking at a small-scale farmer who is going to produce maybe less than a hectare, he might have that labor required to produce on that small piece of land. But if that farmer is maybe in Mozambique where land is not limiting, he's thinking of going towards 5 or 10 hectares, there has to be some level of technology. Remember, the average farmer in Africa, if he was a civil servant or an university professor, he would have retired 10 years or 20 years back. But they are doing farming because they got no other option. The point I'm making is that the average age of a farmer in Africa is very old. And the really big problem there is that, you know what, there is a generation gap because the young ones don't want to go into agriculture. Why is it so? Well, look, it's been seen as the last option employer. So the question is again, once these old guys retire, that means one, there will be loss of labor. So we have to think of actually injecting a bit of technology. And one of the things here we got to think about is actually how do we bring in mechanization? Maybe in this meeting I've heard maybe mechanization being mentioned just once. But mechanization will be needed to actually reduce the labor input and maybe also to make soybean production more attractive. Then also maybe mechanization can actually reduce post-harvest losses. You know, in Southern Africa we grow maize. When the maize matures, I can leave it in the field for 2 months. It will be standing there. I can't do that with soybean. Within a month or so, all the grain would have shattered to the ground. And that actually will be a big post-harvest loss. So I think in this project, really, we need to think about how we are going to capture some of the opportunities which center around mechanization. How do you actually harvest the crop using some kind of machines? We know that in the commercial sector, they use these large-scale combine harvesters. But are these the kind of machines we need for small-scale farmers? Well, I don't think so. But then what are the other options we need to look at? Maybe we can learn from Brazil because they have been through that path. Thank you very much.
I think we can answer these 2 questions.
I'll comment on the seed quality. In our company, we don't breed for seed quality. We target other traits, and the stage that soybean are in Brazil, it doesn't matter if it has a bad seed quality, we will produce it. We'll find a way to produce it. So we look at the phenotype, and that's what really matters. Now, there is research, and Embrapa has some research going on, and I particularly know the researcher there that's targeting this. And it has to do with the composition of the tegument in soybean. So they are working on that to improve the seed quality. Now, my naive view of looking at Africa, I think genetics for seed quality, every time you bring a trait to the equation, it's a complications. Okay, so if we can avoid that, the suggestion would go through maybe what we do in off-season production of seeds. Okay, that's, for instance, that's the solution that countries like Paraguay is adopting. I think it's interesting thing. Again, I don't know the conditions in Africa, but eventually the problem is too much rain during during harvest. So you can switch that and get by also with storage. Just to give you an idea, in Mato Grosso, how they deal with that. If you go and see what is a seed production in Mato Grosso, I don't call it seed production, I call it a war operation there, because essentially you have like 20, 25 days of, it rains every day. So you have like 2-3 hours windows to go in the field and harvest. So what they do is they harvest the beans with humidity before it actually dries down, and dry all the seed. And so to me, I think the technology exists. It's a matter of how you're going to implement there in Africa, and that's why I see like co-ops as a good solution, right? So you can have a co-op producing seeds for all the small farmers there with a little bit, not much investment, but it's not that complicated, I think. Okay. I don't know if I answer your question there. And forgive me, you mentioned something about Brazil or what? Mechanization. Yeah. Yeah, in Brazil, it's all mechanized, and believe it or not, we are going out through a problem of we don't have people to work in the field. That's all farmers are facing the same thing that you are facing in Africa now, that young people don't want to go to agriculture. And so I don't know, it's brainstorming here, but eventually, as I mentioned, our farm size there are larger than probably in Africa. Maybe a good example is, to look at China. Maybe China is going through a process, where the small farmers, they are, getting together and introducing some mechanization, and again, I see a co-op as a good solution for that. One tractor can work several farmers and several farms, but it's when you look at Africa, my friend there, my new friend there mentioned one important thing is to keep the small farmers in business. Because soybean, like in Brazil, when we move to central Brazil, it's large production, and the local people there in Mato Grosso, you don't find any Mato Grosso born people that produce soybean there. They were taken over by the southern people that migrated to that. So luckily they didn't have much people there and small farmers. In southern Brazil, the way the small farmers survived, because soybean at the end of the day is a commodity, right? So you need some scale, right? And the way they survived is through co-ops. They were very successful through co-ops. And so I think I insist on that. I think it's worth looking at that more carefully.
I think also we can learn from the Bangladesh experience where it's not for the soy but for the rice harvesting, where the farmers adopted and they have the small scale or a small size harvester and threshers. And the technology there, they are using it because, again, they have problem in finding the labor. But how to adapt this harvester and the threshers used for the rice, for the soybean, that's another question. Pete, you want to comment on the post-harvest loss and the mechanization part?
Yeah, I mean, I think it relates to kind of Eberson's, he's got this benefit of history in the early part of what was going on in Mato Grosso in the 1970s. And there's some real parallels with, I know Dennis's experience in the U.S. with crop improvement system, certainly the co-ops in the United States back a number of years ago. But group action has a role to play among small farmers, and whether it's a co-op or whatever form the organization takes. But certainly there seems to be a pattern here that to access the mechanization, to access the inputs. Everson didn't talk about the Fundação MET, which is the Mato Grosso Foundation, which was a group action to develop the adapted germplasm for the low latitude region. And it was a bunch of farmers getting together and figuring out how to do this on their own. And Brapa was not involved at the time. It was kind of a contentious sort of situation, but it was the farmers addressing their need for soybean seed. And this is a problem if the private sector does not jump in to provide the soybean seed and the investment in soybean seed. The farmers and farmer organizations may be able to fill that gap. And so there are some very successful models out there, and sounds like Ahmed in other developing country settings as well. So I do think this input kind of elephant in the room, I think that's a big component of tropical soybean production, and producers are going to have to think differently about how they go and acquire the smaller producers. And we've seen good success stories before in the tropical soybean space.
I want to add some few points on the seed viability issue. I don't know any specific study why seed viability is lost quickly, but from a practical point of view, in West Africa, the environment is hot and humid. So right after harvest, if we keep the seed, until the next planting season, viability goes down to some 80, 85, 87%. So there is a big loss. So what we do in such a situation practically is that we produce breeder seed and experimental seed in the off-season. We have off-season facility through irrigation. And then we provide fresh seed for trials and also for those who request seed from IITA in Africa and other countries, so that they can plant fresh seed and then germination is very good. The other experience I'm having is in the mid-altitude condition, like in Malawi. We can keep seed from one season to the next, by and large in good condition. The reason is that we harvest seed in Malawi around late April, May, and then the cold season comes. It's in the southern hemisphere. June, July, August are cold, partly September, and the temperature rises in October, and by mid-November, late November is planting. So even then, even in that region, some of the private seed growers, they use off-season. So off-season is one of the options, but requires some resources. And when we think of the seed system, that kind of investment will come from the private sector. So we have to really support the private sector to do that.
Any last question or comments?
I'm Fawzi Hashmi. I see the main interest here is on the grain soybean. But considering the fact that there are large areas of soil that they are poor in fertility, soil fertility, this combined with the bad nutrition in some of the African countries. Why we are not focusing on vegetable soybean, and we know it has high protein content, and forage soybean, which is good for soil, a soil conditioner.
One observation and one question, I guess. My experience, at least in soybean value chain development, is the processing part of that's a pretty big, important one. And I don't see and hear lots of processing folks here. Maybe there are, and I just don't know it. But just a note that's something be important to include. Number two, though, I think this is more of a development question, Vern, more than maybe a soybean innovation lab, but it has a relationship to this whole question of, I think it's really important for us to better understand this link between research results, sort of technology development, application and testing and all of that, and then scaling up. Because if we want to affect 20 million people instead of 2,000 in a circumscribed area, we need to really understand that process a lot better than I think we do. And John Corbett talked about that in his presentation too, this, how can we make that process work better, faster, incentivize it, so that it reaches 20 million instead of 2,000. One of the, and we see, I think, a lot of this kind of thing happening in research parks that are associated with universities. The University of Illinois has a very large research park, and it's growing, and all kinds of people are coming there and trying to figure out how to work with the university to make this new research results in a technological thing, and then how do you make that into a scalable, what we're calling scalable, we used to call it other things, to market, commercialize it. I think IFPRI was starting to look at that. I don't know if they really are yet, but somewhere along the line, if we're going to make a difference in your two big goals, reducing poverty and reducing hunger, we have to understand that process a lot better. We have to understand how to make it more effective and more efficient. And I don't know whether the Soybean Innovation Lab would have certain part of that process, but I would encourage AID to think about understanding that whole process more effectively.
Thank you. That is a really important question. And I think it's really at the heart of where we are in sort of the life cycle of Feed the Future. You know, so we got off the ground in 2009, 2010, and we had, you know, the startup part of being in a system. You have all the energy to get everything going. And now I think we're at the reflective stage where we're thinking, how can we really structure our programs differently to ensure that we can have those impacts? And so one of the innovation labs, the Legume Innovation Lab based at Michigan State, there's a professor there, Maiwish Meridia, who has actually really thought a lot about this and has a fabulous PowerPoint. I would direct you to the Legume Lab at MSU to find it. But basically it talks about the impact pathway and thinking about all of the different steps that go from basically affecting one person to 10 people to 100 people to 1,000 people to 1 million people. You know, really, what does that curve look like, and how do you operationalize that from the perspective of a researcher? And I think that one of the exercises that they do, which I think is something that is worth reviewing, particularly for the PIs in the program, is thinking through what is it that you do, and then talking to partners who see it from a very different angle, many of whom are in this room right now, and say, how would you shift the question you ask in your survey, which would then enable you to give the feedback to the biophysical scientists to then target that thing that will make the difference between scalable and not scalable. You know, something that's going to be great for 50 farmers, but not feasible to do at scale. The other set of partners that we haven't really talked about are the national and host country research partners, who are enormously knowledgeable about everything that's going on in their country, particularly around the constraints and challenges that are fundamentally researchable questions. And so it's really critical to ensure that those communication pathways are bidirectional, to ensure that the knowledge and understanding and awareness that is already on the ground and available to the research community in the US, to ensure that we tap into that, to really focus then on the really fundamental researchable questions that make sense, because maybe we already know answers to other things. So, but I do take your point. I mean, we are at a moment, I think, in Feed the Future as an initiative where we are really trying to think about, okay, so we've got some theoretical thinking about this, but now we need to figure out what are the actual steps to ensure that that actually works. And it in itself is an experiment. Like, if we change the way we do research, do we then have something that's truly scalable? And that's what I, punt back to the community to help us understand better.
Pete, you want to comment on the issue of scaling?
This is something we think a lot about, and from day one of proposal writing and so forth, and ongoing, and I think as researchers, and I'll just speak for myself, it's really a luxury just to write and work and just say, and then a miracle happens on down, and something will happen. It's very comforting that, and you can assume all sorts of great things are happening with your research, though none of them may actually be true. But I think what USAID in the original request for proposal, and what Vern's saying here is about that obligation for us as researchers to, is it every day, is it every hour, is it every week? But think about what is the connection of our work to the million. And I think that's really a very important process and an obligation as we go forward, because I think it is convenient, and we could probably get by not doing that. But I think the design and what USAID is going after is really about making that connection. And so I think it is a challenge for us. We're thinking of mechanisms that take our research, connect us more to this scalable issue, and also, as mentioned, in our survey work, making that more relevant in our engagement. As many of you may or may not know, we're very well embedded with obviously IITA, but also the NAR system. And so this is really critical that you have that feedback from the National Ag Research technical people. And I think we're going to think about how to do that even better. So, you know, I think this is really front and center for us and for the other labs as well, and for the universities about, you know, I think gone are the days of saying, you know, we'll publish and, you know, miracle happens, nature will pull this article or whatever it is, or some VC will come on campus and find our technology rummaging around and throw some money at it and so forth. But I think we do have an obligation to be much more explicit, much more proactive, much more in our design. And I think that's what we're striving for, but it's new ground for us.
Thank you. And as Vern and Beat mentioned, the goal from USA and Feed the Future that we fund research is not just to publish articles. The goal is how we translate this knowledge to the hands of the farmers and how we reach the farmers in the smallholders, how we help them to become or to get out of being just farming as subsistence farmers. We have 2 high-level goals. One of them, or of the poverty elevation, and as Rob mentioned in the morning, and it's not only poverty, also malnutrition. And malnutrition in all of the countries where we work is high, approaching as high as 40 to 45% in childhood stunting and maternal child malnutrition. In Africa, where soybean, for example, where soybean innovation lab work, their diet is heavy in carbohydrate and depending on maize, and there will be a big missed opportunity if we don't also work hard in how to incorporate soybean and other legumes as part of the local diet, because it is a high source or rich source of protein and other micronutrients. Plus, it is a high value crop, so high value in terms of cash, as you know, high value in terms of nutrients. And this is one of the goals that we hopefully working together, and we would like to hear from you via email, contact us or contact Beat, what you think, how we can work better in order to make soybean more integral part of the local diet and how to incorporate it there. Another thing that we'd like to hear from you about your thought about this workshop, the design of the workshop, what you think about it, and hopefully planning for the next workshop next year. Hopefully, as Pete mentioned or we talked, we'll have it somewhere in the field instead of having it in DC or Illinois. Pete, you want to add something?
No, you said it well. No,
Thank you for your time. I know it has been really a long day and it was really packed, but we really got a lot of information, a lot of feedback, and we listened to great presentation from great speakers. Thank you for your for being here, and looking forward to continuous collaboration. And if you have any suggestion, any comments, any feedback, please let us know.